lesson from Hegel. In the introduction to the philosophy of right, G.W.F. Hegel explains that one of the essential capacities of the human ego is the ability to mentally suppress all external or internal givenness, whether it presents itself as physical presence or through any other means. In essence, it is the capacity to negate the entire universe and make self-consciousness the only reality. Without this faculty, we would be trapped in the circle of immediate stimuli, like animals, and would not have access to higher degrees of abstraction. The negation of the given, the unrestricted infinitude of absolute or universality abstraction, the pure thought of itself, according to Hegel, is one of the peculiar glories of human intelligence. However, it is a dangerous force when exercised independently of other compensating and balancing capacities, among which, evidently, is the capacity to say yes to the totality of reality, a capacity that Hegel himself illustrated vividly in the famous episode where, after contemplating a magnificent mountain for a long time, he lowered his head and pronounced, "It is indeed so." When the ego experiences abstract negation as a sense of freedom, and the self-determination of the will clings to this experience, Hegel continues, then we have negative freedom, freedom in emptiness, which emerges as passion and takes shape in the world. It is worth quoting the paragraph in full, given its analytical and prophetic force. When this freedom turns to practical action, it takes shape in religion and politics as the fanaticism of destruction, the destruction of all existing social order, as the elimination of individuals who are objects of suspicion and the annihilation of any organization that attempts to rise again from the ruins. It is only by destroying something that this negative will has a sense of its own existence. Of course, it imagines wanting to achieve some positive state of affairs, such as universal equality or universal religious life, but in fact, it does not want this state to be effectively realized because such realization would lead to some kind of order, to a particular formation of organizations and individuals, whereas the self-consciousness of that negative freedom arises precisely from the negation of particularity, from the negation of all objective characterization. Consequently, what this negative freedom pretends to want can never be something particular but only an abstract idea, and giving effect to this idea can only consist of the fury of destruction. This paragraph should be contemplated daily by all scholars and practical individuals interested in understanding the world of politics. It elucidates certain constants of the revolutionary movement that would otherwise be inexplicable, so inexplicable and paradoxical that the mind of the average observer refuses to see them together, preferring to cling to isolated, occasional, and temporary aspects, mistakenly believing they represent the totality or essence of the phenomenon. One of these constants is the perpetual self-denial that allows the revolutionary movement to assume various forms, changing its face overnight and disorienting not only its adversaries but also a significant portion of its own followers. Since the unity of purpose within the movement is a pure abstraction and its proclaimed objectives at any given moment are merely imperfect and temporary embodiments of that abstraction, it can shed its particular manifestations like changing socks, losing nothing and even elevating itself to new levels of power by suddenly shifting from one policy to the opposite, ready to revert to the previous one without prior notice if circumstances demand it. For example, guerrilla warfare and terrorism never achieve victory on the military front, but they generate a general longing for peace, which can be satisfied by denying the legitimacy of the violence that was defended just yesterday as an inalienable right, extracting from the violent facade a core of supposedly legitimate demands, and offering peace in exchange for legally acquired power. Defeat is transfigured into victory, denial into triumphant affirmation. The ruling party in Brazil came to power precisely through this device, whose know-how it now offers to the FARC. When a faction of the revolutionary movement renounces its own violence, it indicates that violence is about to achieve its objectives. These mutations would not be possible if the concrete ends and values proclaimed by the revolutionary movement, their particular objective characterization, as Hegel would say, had any inherent reality in themselves and were not merely illusory figures temporarily projected by the underlying abstraction. But self-denial does not only affect speeches and ideological pretexts of the revolution. It reaches the very core of the movement, periodically sacrificed on the altar of its own ambitions. The ultimate foundation of human society, as taught by St. Paul the Apostle and St. Augustine, is love for one's neighbor. Tinged with or without hatred towards the stranger, which is, so to speak, its demonic counterpart, reflecting the inherent imperfection of human love rather than an independent substantive factor as Emmanuel Levinas claimed, the community of the Spirit, the shared devotion to a sense of life open to transcendence, flows back onto each of its members, enveloping them in a kind of sacredness in the eyes of others, whether by designating them as members of the body of Christ or the Islamic Ummah. A civis Romanus, a descendant of Moses, an heir to the Nhambiquara tradition, or a simple citizen of modern democracy participating in the community of inviolable rights acquired, ultimately, from millennial religious institutions. No fraternity is conceivable without a common fatherhood. Even in the immediate sphere of economic life, no fruitful commerce is possible without the trust society that Alain Perfit spoke of, founded on the belief that the sacred values of one party will not be violated by the other. In contrast to this universal rule, the revolutionary movement stands out for the consistency with which its own members persecute and annihilate each other within the organizations and governments it creates, with a systematic obstinacy and in quantities never before seen in any other type of human community throughout history. The French Revolution beheaded more revolutionaries than priests and aristocrats. The Russian Revolution of 1917 was not fought against Tsarism, but against the revolutionaries of 1905. Nazism rose to power on the corpses of its own militants, sacrificed to the opportunism of a political alliance on the Night of the Long Knives, on June 29, 1934. However, it would be an illusion to imagine that these bloody rituals merely reflect the passing fury of revolutionary catastrophes. Once consolidated in power, revolutionary parties escalate violence, driven by paranoid suspicion against their own members, killing them in the millions and tens of millions with a frenzy that surpasses anything the most violent leaders of the reaction ever thought of doing to them. No right-wing dictator has ever imprisoned, tortured, and killed as many communists as the governments of the USSR, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, North Korea, and Cuba. The tears of hatred that well up in the faces of left-wing militants when they speak of Francisco Franco, Augusto Pinochet, or even the very mild dictatorship in Brazil, express nothing more than a hysterical mechanism of moral self-defense, the repression of conscience, as Igor Caruso called it, the reverse projection of the incalculably greater guilt that the revolutionary movement bears towards millions of its own faithful. Contrary to the universal inclination of human nature to build social life on love for one another, the revolutionary movement creates societies entirely based on hatred, turning the provisional unity inspired by hatred of this or that external or internal enemy into a satanic imitation of love. None of this would be possible if the ideals and banners raised by the revolutionary movement at every step of its history had any substantiality in themselves. In this case, the common fidelity to sacred values would protect the members of the revolutionary community from each other. But these ideals are like figures formed by clouds in the sky, destined to dissipate at the first wind, leaving behind only the empty sky. The only central and enduring loyalty of the revolutionary movement is to abstract freedom, which, along with its conjoined sisters, abstract equality and abstract fraternity, cannot fully embody itself in any particular historical form and, consisting only of absolute emptiness, can only find satisfaction in a fleeting feeling of existence through the exercise of annihilation, in the insatiable fury of destruction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This text was taken from the article, A Lesson from Hegel, by Olavo de Carvalho, written in 2008.